right, good afternoon, everybody. We'll call this afternoon's meeting of the Diversion Authority Public Outreach Committee meeting to order. Our committee chair, Roger Olson, I believe, is attending via telephone today, and he's asked that I chair today's meeting. Roger, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Thanks, Kevin.
Okay, you bet. Okay, so with that, we do have two things to add to our agenda for today that you have before you. So under item 5C, we want to add a presentation on land auctions. That's going to be done by Eric, right?
I will take.
Joe, okay, two of you, okay?
Yep.
And then just some information on the visit from the Assistant Secretary on Friday. So. And we'll put that as item number 7, and we'll move old business to 8. So with that, do we have a motion to approve the agenda?
So move.
Okay, second. Okay. No further discussion. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same sign. Motion carried. Do we have the minutes from the September 25th meeting in your packet?
Move to approve.
We have a motion to approve. Do we have a second? Further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same.
Aye.
Motion carried. Okay, item number 2 then is project talking points. Rocky, are you going to handle this?
Sure. Just a regular update, a monthly update of the talking points. You can see what's changed in red there from the previous month. These were used, they were updated, you can see they were updated about a week ago in conjunction with the Washington DC trip that the leadership went on, so they could brief on that trip. I'll say the one change I made between that version and this version was that under the WIFIA item that Governor Tim Walz from Minnesota also sent a letter of support to the EPA for the WIFIA loan. So there was a Minnesota letter. So. Otherwise, you can see the changes. It's mainly, obviously, the WIFIA news. I think everyone saw that in the paper and on TV. And then we'll talk about it later in the agenda, but the property owner upstream mitigation area letter that went out. Those are the major changes. Wanted you to have the latest.
All right. Do we have any questions?
And I guess, I'll make sure to supply this to sort of a change from previously, supply it to local legislators as well as part of our sending it out to them and to the business task force, and also to reps of the city of Fargo, city of West Fargo. I mean.
Very good, thank you, Rocky. Item number 3, the Colmar outreach. Joel, are you taking that one?
Yeah, I think Rocky and I can kind of tag team that one a little bit.
I didn't put anything in here for it.
Okay, so I guess just an update on that. We've been working through engaging all the political entities that are affected by the Colmar. I've done a number of presentations for different boards and committees related to that, just basically providing them an explanation of what the Colmar is. And then we've been supplying them with what the new proposed FEMA flood insurance maps are going to look like for their jurisdictions, and been taking any comments related to that. By and large, those meetings have been going fairly uneventful. Everybody has been very appreciative of the outreach and the ability to see what their regulatory floodplain maps are going to look like. Most, if not all, the meetings have ended with just a general discussion of where the diversion's at, schedule, current events, things that have been going on. But I've been receiving fairly favorable engagement with those boards. Now, there's a number of boards that didn't request a meeting with me. And so I do intend to follow up with those and see if there's any interest in having me attend a meeting. And it doesn't have to be just strictly related to the Colmar. I think I'd like to just reach out to all affected political entities related to this project and make myself available if the boards would like to have me come and present. So.
Okay.
Maybe just an update on the Colmar status as a whole. So this was, we're in the middle of the process, and so this was part of the requirements by FEMA to do this outreach. We sort of took it to the next level of presentations and visits from Joel, but I think we're a couple months away from final approval from FEMA. They're going through some final modeling comments back and forth, and so nothing out of the ordinary. Same as we went through last time when we got the Clomar approved, but just so everyone realizes where we're at in that sort of important timeline, because at the end we'll have sort of a snapshot in time that we can use for our land acquisition team on what are the impacts upstream of the project. There's a couple other things as well, but that's the big one, and so we'll wait on FEMA for that. That's also probably when the next round of outreach should take place, if not before then in the interim for some reason.
Yeah, and Rocky makes a very good point there. One of our struggles with outreach is that we haven't been able to accurately show affected individuals, whether they're in or out, and how the changes are going to affect them, principally on the upstream part of this project.
So the Clomar better sets the footprint, is that a way to say it?
Yeah, once the Clomar is approved by FEMA, then we have basically concurrence from FEMA that if we build the project, the floodplain will look very similar to what we've proposed. And so with that assurance from FEMA, we can then use that line in the sand per se to be able to update our mitigation plan and then start to engage folks and give them a little bit more clarity. One piece that is still missing from the puzzle is the State Water Commission's determination on if we need to mitigate to 1/10 of a foot or 6 inches. And that's also on the Minnesota side. We'll eventually need to get determination from the DNR whether it's 6 inches or 1/10 of a foot. That will also determine how we approach certain parcels and properties and what sort of options are available to them as far as mitigation is concerned. At this point, without having both the regulatory agency determination and the Clomar determination, it makes it very difficult for us to be able to provide a clear answer as to what sort of mitigation tactics we're going to be able to implement with folks. So in some respects, we're sort of in a holding pattern with some people, which we know is frustrating for them and it's frustrating for us. So the positive side of this is that we're moving through the Clomar process. We expect, I think, a few more months until a final determination from FEMA, which also coincides with the State Water Commission. Our hope that we receive a determination from the State Water Commission.
Eric?
I would agree with all of that. Thanks for the good explanation. I would also just point out that we have 2 state permitting agencies. One of them we're going to be meeting with shortly, the state water engineer in North Dakota, to define this boundary where we need to acquire property rights. We will ultimately need to have a similar discussion with the DNR, and we had been having those conversations. In fact, they were really good conversations with the Buffalo Red Group and the DNR and the Corps. And since the legal issues took over those conversations, we've not been able to engage the DNR in those types of discussions. And so we're hoping that we can have some more headway with North Dakota and then use that as an opportunity to re-engage the DNR in the similar type discussions. So we've got a fair playing field on both sides.
Yeah, it would be our hope that both regulatory authorities would have matching.
I think that would be ideal, but there is a state line for a reason,
Right.
and so I don't know that it's necessarily drop dead critical. But I agree with you, it would be ideal.
The thing to be aware of is I think maybe that might not be the same, is that the timelines are going to be different. Likely when we do the round of outreach to upstream property owners, in 3-4 months or whenever the right timing is after the Clomar is done and the state engineer does their work, we might not be in a situation where Minnesota has the ability to answer us while the contested case hearing is going on. So for upstream landowners on the Minnesota side, especially to our Minnesota reps here, the next round of outreach to them may not be as informative as it is to the North Dakota residents, and that's because of the contested case hearing.
Yeah, it's a tough situation for us because we want to provide clarity, obviously, and certainty to folks that are being impacted. Our hands are really tied on the Minnesota side with the contested case hearing. People are reaching out to us, wanting information, and unfortunately, we can't give them information until we get clarity on these things. So it's a difficult situation now. The thing I'm working on is still continuing to be proactive in what communication we can give people, updated schedules, and so that people are aware of the moving parts that need to fall into place before we can give certainty on these items.
Questions regarding the Clomar process? Okay, we'll move on to item number 4, the fmdiversion.com and traffic and analytics. Tammy, are you going to handle it?
I can do that. I have the website up, and I can run through Twitter and YouTube too really quick. We don't have a video to show this week or this month, but one thing I wanted to note is that there was a really high open rate for the newsletter this month, which is good, and a very, very high click rate when we announced that Joel was hired and it had some information about him. The other thing that I wanted to point out is if you look at the second page on the website, the blue line is the line that is this year's traffic, and kind of overall it's higher than last year's traffic in general, which is a good sign. So it means we have got good content on there and we continue to build users. So
Maybe a preview of things to come too. Joel had a great concept idea about, as we've done in the past, as the website was updated a year or so ago.
yeah, February.
We tried to make it more mobile friendly as we saw more mobile users. And so Joel had an idea of maybe taking it even one step further about how we could use it, an app type format. And we've had some preliminary discussions on how to do that. And I think we're close to a good concept to bring back to Joel and to this committee at some point, to talk about how to make it even more mobile friendly than it is. Something that, board members or legislators or something could use to get easy updates. The website's such a great public transparency location, but it can often be overwhelming too, just because there's so much information. So if there's a way we can get it to just show what's recent, what's the most important thing going on.
Yeah, thanks, Rocky, for bringing that up. As you folks know, the state legislators all get state-issued iPads, and they have them with them. Well, most of them, I would believe, during the legislative session. And that it would be a great opportunity for us to be able to push information to that app on their iPads and provide them the information that they need to make decisions in a timely manner. The application would also be certainly implementable with board members here and providing timely information in a more convenient fashion. So we'll be working on that. I think it's a great idea. There's all sorts of different functionalities that we could add to it for different audience members for this project. So we'll keep you up to date on where that goes.
Very good. Thank you. Tammy, anything else?
One item I just wanted to bring up for the committee's consideration. I received a few comments about from the construction community about maybe trying to tie in the Corps' advertisements into our website, or maybe a link to the Corps' where they have their advertisements. I think some members were looking for, of the construction community, were looking for information related to the wild rice bid, and they thought it would be great if there was some link on our diversion website to the Corps' bid packages somehow, or advertisements.
Good. Tammy, you can work on that.
Yeah, we posted the wild rice RFP when it came out.
Okay.
And it's listed under bids, but it's not front and center with news.
Sure.
And so maybe we could just reclassify it and have it kind of be front and center when it's, when it comes out, instead of just as construction news.
Sure.
Yeah. That's a good idea.
Okay. We'll move into item number 5, the lands outreach. We'll start with the upstream property owner's letter.
Yeah, so in your packet, there's a a sample letter, and I tried to, you see the big orange blob on top, I tried to take off the person's name. These letters were all similar to different areas upstream. You know, this is one of the most important things we do is send letters to our property owners that are likely impacted by the project or may be impacted by the project. This particular letter went out to 350 or so property owners. This was the North Dakota letter. The Minnesota letter was very similar to this, and it was signed by the sort of equivalent on the other side of the river. This is something we hope to continue to do, and we continue to hope that it'll be much more informative the next go around after the CLOMAR and other determinations are made, where we can include sort of an individualized information about the property, if that's an individual map, or you know, contact information to sort of start the next phase if they have questions and that sort of thing. And so I think this is sort of something we did. I think we sent out in February or March, the last round. And so I expect these will get shorter periods when we can kind of continue to update project status. In some ways they work like a newsletter if nothing's going on, just to make sure that we keep them up to date on project status and sort of check the box that, you know, everyone has the opportunity to know what's going on and have a contact info. You also see that it is on the new letterhead, and so you can see if you're a board member, your name's on the top there. But it's got Joel's contact info as well, which I think has been helpful. Keeps Joel busy.
Yeah, yeah. And Eric and Rocky, I'm assuming you guys have been receiving phone calls from people upstream related to this letter. I know I had one.
Been a few, really not that many. I mean, we've had a number of property owners reach out, and we've met with a few property owners in the last couple weeks, presumably as part of this outreach or because of this outreach, but we had talked with them previously as well. I think, you know, what your comment earlier, Joel, was some property owners are sort of frustrated with the limbo, and they continue to be in a limbo status, and so they're frustrated. The letter that we sent out back in February explained to them we were anticipating getting the CLOMAR approval and, you know, having all that buttoned up by the end of summer, and summer kind of came and went, and we realized, yeah, we probably need to do another update to these folks, and so there's not a ton new that we can tell them right now, which is unfortunate, but so I think that's kind of the extent of the outreach. There's been a handful of other people that have called and asked, you know, can we get started on an appraisal, and, you know, so that avenue's working, I think.
Sure.
I feel that, you know, since this recorded meeting, I feel the need to add to, we did just get about 10 of these returned to us, unable to forward, and so we had used some sort of purposely the same mailing list we used in February, and so we're going through the process now to figure out, okay, where those properties must have changed hands or something, and so getting them so we can resend out that letter to the proper one. So in case anybody's listening that thinks they should have got one that recently acquired their property, we are checking that. They was all sent first class, so we get those back and can correct it. And it's kind of good for us to know whose property has changed hands too. That's helpful in some regards, so, just for awareness.
Move to item number B, the bio-geo monitoring easement meetings.
Eric, since you're here, do you want to?
Sure. I think we've probably had maybe 4 of these neighborhood meetings so far, and have a handful scattered through the rest of November. So these are targeted invites for certain property owners by watershed. All told, I think there's, I forget now, maybe 20 different sites where the Corps has identified a need to acquire these easements that allow them to do river monitoring of biotic and soil erosion conditions over the many years. And so as a way to inform some property owners of the need for those easements, and as a way to, you know, perhaps get the easements signed, we've been holding neighborhood meetings with sort of targeted invite groups. The last one we had was down in Hickson a couple weeks ago. We have another one scheduled, I believe it's next week, in Hickson for another group of property owners along the Cheyenne River. So they seem to be going well. We've had some that were really well attended and lots of questions. We've had others that have been very lightly attended, but yet some good dialogue and interaction, and then had a couple that are sort of in between. And I think it's just another outreach tool that we're using. These easements are a bit unique. we've been incorporating property owner feedback and modifying the easements to accommodate some of the feedback we've been getting from the property owners, and so I think that's a positive step, and we'll continue to do those for the next, through the month of November in North Dakota, and then in Minnesota, we'll probably be starting those meetings after the first of the year. So.
Does the Corps of Engineers have,
Yes.
they're at those meetings?
Yeah, so the Corps does most of the presentation. We'll introduce the topic and help answer some Q&A, but the Corps does most of the discussion. They have their geomorphologist and their sort of biologist there to help answer some detailed questions.
Okay, item number C, that's an addition we had regarding land auctions. There's a land auction coming up. I'm assuming that's what Joel, you're going to start with that?
Yeah, that's right. So I'll give a little background, and then Eric and I will kind of answer any questions that the board has. So in front of you is the flyer for the land auction. There's 10 parcels in this auction. 7 of those parcels, if you look on the back of the one-page sheet we've handed out, 7 of those parcels are within the upstream staging area, so we will be required to eventually put flowage easements on those 7 properties in the blue. With the addition of T4, 5, and 6, we're also going to need construction easements for the I-29 grade raise project. And so these lands have become available through a public auction. And internally, we've been discussing, does it make sense for us to bid on these parcels, purchase them, put the easements on, turn them around, sell them on the open market again. We have received some concern from some producers in the area about having to bid against the government for land. And so because we don't have any set in stone policy as far as this is concerned, and these parcels aren't necessarily needed to be purchased in order to put the easements on. I mean, the plan all along is that we would engage the landowners through the easement discussion, ultimately put the flowage easements on the land without ever having to actually purchase the property itself. We're kind of outside of our comfort area, and so I wanted to bring this to both the Public Relations Committee as well as land management to kind of tee this up as more of a policy-related issue for you folks to consider. And once we maybe get a little bit more clarity from the committees, we may be able to make a decision on how we want to approach maybe this auction, but also auctions in the future as well. So I'll turn it over to Eric if he's got anything else he'd like to add, and then I think we'll just
before you start, so you mentioned T4, 5, and 6 would need the addition of for the I-29 road raise. That wouldn't be, that raise doesn't go as far south as T8 down there?
No, it does not. Yeah, it stops basically a little bit past 52nd Avenue, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think it stops at T6 essentially.
Okay.
All right, thank you. All right, Eric.
Yeah, maybe just a few things. So we became aware of this just, I don't know, maybe a week and a half ago. We've had, as Joel mentioned, a few internal discussions. I think there's pros and cons on either side of this. No matter what we do, we're absolutely going to be monitoring this auction at a minimum and paying attention to what's the going rate and going price. As Joel mentioned, at some point we need to consider whether we want to be an active bidder. We don't have an explicit policy about buying land via auction. We do have policies about buying land from willing sellers. The policy is part of our mitigation plan, and it currently explains that if a willing seller approaches us, we would be a willing buyer. So you could sort of explain that that's what we're doing here, but it's not explicitly, the same. That being said, generally we've found the best time to buy land is when somebody's selling it. the challenge here is we don't need to own these properties in fee title. We only need the easement, and 4, 5, and 6, we need both a construction easement as well as a flowage easement. Unfortunately, we haven't gone through the full flowage easement valuation process, and so we don't know what that flowage easement is worth. We have some estimates, of course, based on the phase 1 study, and I think, kind of a ballpark figure, but we don't have any detailed estimates. The other thought, I guess, that we've had that I would share with the group here is if we would end up bidding and ended up being the winning bidder, the thought would be all we really need is to retain those easements, and we could then dispose of the rest of the property rights, as quick as possible. And so just hypothetically, say we decide to bid on one or more of these and we end up winning, perhaps we could retain the easements that we need and dispose of the rest of it. And so that's a scenario. The risk of us bidding, maybe just to go a little bit deeper to what Joel said, I think the risk of us bidding is, there's 7 parcels here, roughly, I don't know, maybe 600 some acres, maybe 700 acres. It would be great to lock up those easements in a quick market-based approach. That'd be great. But we need to acquire roughly 30,000 acres of easements. And so if we buy these 700 with a sort of quick and easy action, did we set ourselves up for success on the other 29,000, or did we set ourselves up to have a bigger mountain to climb? I don't know. I think you could make an argument either way on that, and I think that's one of the reasons we wanted to bring this forward for some other considerations.
We've discussed this at the joint board meetings. It's, I can go either way because I see the advantages of both. The advantage is that we would find out what that easement is worth. If we purchase it, put the easement on and sell it right away, we're gonna find out what that easement is worth. And right now, there's all kinds of figures floating around. People don't know what they're gonna get paid for for those easements, and we don't know what we think it's worth. But that would be a quick way to find out what it's worth. I'm not sure that if we're going to enter into a public debacle by bidding on land, that's not good for us either. So I'm kind of floating either way. I know Roger has a, pretty defined position on this.
Roger?
Yeah, this is Roger. Yeah. Yeah, I am not in favor of going and bidding, using public dollars to basically bid against private farmers that we most likely will have to work with down there. I think it's just way too much negative press, much exposure to the legislature on how we're using our dollars. I think it's just way more negative than positive. I know it looks attractive, but I think there's some things maybe we need to take into consideration here.
Have any comments?
I'll just say, I think one important thing through this process is, I know Eric's had some conversations with the auction, Steffes Auctions, and so that they're fully aware of what our needs are at some point, so that the bidder, whoever it is fully aware of, our needs, so that nobody gets accused of hiding any information or that sort of thing. And so it's been a good process up to that point for that reason.
Yeah, just to add on to that, Dan Jacobson and I met with Max Steffes recently. I reached out to Max last week and explained to him that the diversion has some interest in these parcels. He really appreciated the call and appreciated our meeting. I think, from his standpoint, he wants to make sure that he's disclosing all of the information to interested buyers and he's not accused of selling a bill of goods or whatever. So I think he appreciated that info. I shared with him some of the ag studies that we've done, the phase 1 flow easement study, some information about the temporary construction easement for I-29. And so I think that was a positive step, and you know, the buyers should be well informed of what they're buying, I guess.
One more thing, if it's okay. You know, Roger mentioned the legislative opinions, and we have heard in the past, just to be fully clear, is that there's been some tension, I guess, when we've bought more property than we need. For instance, we've bought, you know, full parcels when we only need, you know, a remnant of it, you know, and we've done that for the flexibility of the property owners. But there has been some comments made to that regard, and I could see those comments making it here as well. And you know, that's some bad PR. Of course, on the flip side, you never know who's going to buy these 7 parcels, and if that ends up in a lawsuit, that's also bad PR. And so it's you're sort of going in with known risks, and then, you know, if you don't do it, you have a lot of unknown risks.
Well, that's another component too, in terms of, you know, the cost if we end up having to litigate later to get those easements can be an expensive issue too. You know, so when you look, you know, ultimately we got to look out for the taxpayer dollar here that's going on this, and I could see criticism either way. You know, I can see criticism that you bought too much, and I can see criticism that why didn't you buy it when you had an opportunity to get it for a lesser amount. So it can go either way. I do think that you know, for the land agents, and when these things come up in the future, I do think that our board's going to have to take a policy position on this, you know, and outreach. You know, I think the purpose of this group is to go out and advocate for the policies of the Diversion Authority. I don't think this committee has ever been asked to make a recommendation regarding a policy issue. Now, that would be different than, say, the Lands Committee that's going to meet right after this, and I think that would be a more appropriate place to have that recommendation go before, to come up with a permanent policy. I know our board chair is sitting in the audience today, and I would think that she probably would agree with that position. And so, you know, we'll meet, I serve on the Lands Committee too, and we'll meet after this regarding that, and then maybe that's a better place to maybe make a recommendation regarding policy. I would hope that this group, our purpose is to advocate for the policy positions to get the project completed, so.
And that's a good point, Kevin. This issue transcended just the lands because of the potential negative messaging that could be beholden to our actions on this. And so I wanted to make this committee aware of the issue. And yes, certainly if, you know, we'll take these comments and make sure the Lands Committee is aware of some of the comments that were made here. And if they create a policy that ends up a policy recommendation to the board, that's something we can take there. So I think it's just apparent we're looking for a little bit of direction from you folks, and obviously want you involved in the decision making on how we proceed with this issue. So.
Mr. Chair, could I add one more outreach perspective to Joel and then Eric and the other crossover members? You know, one of the biggest issues we have with acquiring land is when there's structures on them. I think that just adds a whole level of complexity. I don't think any of these properties have structures. That said, they don't have structures today. Some of the biggest PR issues we've run into is when people want to build or have started to build on structures, on property that's vacant today that we need to buy. I think we've seen a couple of those examples that end up driving up the cost too of our acquisition program. And so, you know, retaining the land does have the bonus benefit of knowing that you're not going to be faced in that situation. Just to throw it out there. One more variable for consideration.
Okay. Anything else? Any comments? Okay. We'll let that go to the Lands Committee for. Not that we're passing the buck or anything. Okay, so the next item is the North Dakota Water Conference.
There's a flyer in your packet. I know several of you attend this. The Diversion has attended this on an annual basis for at least the last 7 years, if not longer, through its members, but we will again have a booth there. I believe Joel has a speaking role, I think on December 5th, might be.
Yep, it's on December 5th at 2 o'clock concerning major projects. So it'll be a panel of major projects in North Dakota, and I'll be representing the Diversion Authority and giving an update on the projects.
This has always been a really important one. I'd say it's maybe more important right before the legislative session, but this is just a good chance for Joel to get to know the water world in North Dakota and talk about the project. But it's usually one of the most interactive at our booth, just because everyone's always interested in the updates, and so we'll be working to find a conference plan to make sure we show off our latest and greatest about information about the project. And as I'm aware, there's not, that I'm aware of, a similar one in Minnesota that we've done. I know we've done the Minnesota floodplain managers one in the past, and but I don't think there's a Minnesota water one that I'm aware of. But if there is, we should talk about it.
Rocky, there is a Minnesota Water Resource Conference.
Yeah.
It's more technical in nature, where this is maybe more informational. You know, a better conference for legislators to attend to get up to speed on some issues, on water issues.
Sure.
You know, that certainly there may be some technical aspects that might make sense for the Minnesota Water Conference. I think the Floodplain Managers Conference is probably the most applicable in Minnesota. That would be similar to this, but and of course there is no floodplain managers conference in North Dakota, so a lot of North Dakota floodplain managers end up coming to either the Minnesota or the Montana floodplain managers conference. So
Only a couple of us in North Dakota.
there is, right.
Okay, item number 7, looks like Senator Hoven has set up a visit with R.D. James, the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works, on Friday morning. Do Joel or Rocky, do you want to give a little more info on that meeting?
Yeah, I'll start and Rocky can finish up, because Rocky's been the primary point of contact with Hoven's office to getting these things set up. The Corps will be here and they'll be hosting the Assistant Secretary of the Army. We provided this biography of Mr. R.D. James. He is the person responsible for making the funding requests for the Corps work plan to OMB, and also some other technical recommendations to OMB that may be beneficial for our project in the future. He has been a pretty staunch advocate of this project, and he was the primary individual responsible for approving the amendment to the project partnership agreement with the federal government for $300 million last year. So, or this year, was that this year? This year. So it's a pretty big deal that we get to have him come and visit us and get a briefing on the project and get to meet the board members. And so he'll be here semi-briefly in the morning, but we will have about 45 minutes with him. Hoven is hosting this meeting, so Rocky's been working on logistics with Hoven's office, and maybe you want to take over, Rocky?
Yeah, I just encourage everybody to attend anytime you get a presidential appointee that can come here. Obviously, they have a lot of influence, and so it's a good chance to roll out the red carpet and show them our community. So.
Absolutely.
That is at
8:30 in this room here at the Fargo City Hall. Very good.
Mm-hmm.
8:30 on Friday.
8:30 Friday morning, yep, November 1st. All right, do we have anything else, any other business this afternoon?
I guess this is a continuation from a topic at our last meeting. Commissioner Steen, you had mentioned, maybe we should look at a regular communication piece in the media. Given that some thought over the last month, and I really do think that's a good idea, a good recommendation. I guess the only piece I struggle with is, do we want this to be in the opinion section of the media, or can we do something more formal as an editorial? And if that's the case, will the media publish that once a month? But I think there was a recent article in the Daily News just yesterday, basically claiming there's a lot of misinformation out there, and the Diversion is responsible for some of that. You know, in my opinion, the Diversion has been publishing pretty factual pieces as press releases that are not in the opinion section. And so, you know, to, I guess, demystify some of the rumors and misinformation out there, I really think a regular piece would help to do that. But, you know, I guess I just wanted to maybe have just a general discussion of, you know, this committee's thoughts. And I mean, I'm willing to go anywhere, public opinion or what have you. But, you know, I know some other agencies like the Moorhead Downtown group, they have Derek LaPointe on talk radio once a month for a half hour. And that seems to provide, you know, some pretty good information to the public of what's happening and what's transpiring. So that could be a potential option as well.
Will the form give you a monthly spot in a specific place?
Can certainly ask them and reach out and see if that's an opportunity. But, you know, and I would engage the Daily News and other papers too that maybe traditionally are publishing, you know, opposition pieces to the Diversion Authority, and you know, ask them to also run a piece that we could, you know, provide some clarity in what the Diversion's doing and some updates and those sorts of things. So.
My thought is it should be a piece that we actually write, not something that the reporter picks up,
right,
their own words, and here it hits, which is always partial, you know, sentences and partial topics, out of context stuff. Would be something that we write. It goes in not an editorial, it goes into a local news or regional news piece, and it's just written by us on a monthly basis or whatever we think is appropriate. I don't think it should be an opinion piece. It should be factual. Here's what we're doing, and then let people take off on that, because I think it carries more weight if it's not on the opinion page, personally. So.
I would agree, Rick. I would agree. Okay, well, let me reach.
What opinion? So.
Let me reach out to some different media entities and see if, you know, how willing they would be to publish a regular piece about the Diversion project. And you know, we could pick various topics. We could talk about the topics here at this committee meeting, and, you know, formulate an article based off of that. So.
And Roger, while you're on the phone here, I talked with Joel just before this meeting, and I suggested that he give a report on his previous month's activities, outreach activities. There's some things that can be sensitive that you won't want to talk about, I understand that, but I think it would be good to hear of who you've been talking to and as part of this outreach project. So.
And I think that's a great idea, Commissioner Campbell. And so I'll certainly add that to our agenda on the upcoming months. And I guess the most notable one I could give you an update on from last month is I was on KFGO. Let's see, when was that? Last Friday. And talk radio piece with the Jay Thomas show, and was on for about an hour answering questions about the Diversion project, and received a caller, was able to talk about some issues. So I'd say it went fairly well, and I'm always looking to do more opportunities like that to be able to engage in the public debate and, you know, provide that factual information and get it out there. So.
All right, seeing no other business, this meeting can be adjourned.